Welcome to Chromatic Counsel Podcast, the podcast where law, leadership, and color collide. I'm your host, Carrie Heaps, and I have a great show lined up for you today. One quick announcement: if you are an attorney located in Texas or in Florida, and you want to learn a little bit more about body language and how to read that on Zoom, on camera, I hope you'll join me for Digital Tells. You can click on the link below to check out our class catalog for when that class is going to be taught. Also, too, if you don't have time to attend any of the classes, you can always get it on demand and watch anytime. And that link is in the show notes below. And today I am bringing an exciting guest with me today, Dr. Celeste Simmons. She is a forensic psychologist and founder of Family and Forensic Solutions, where she helps families and individuals navigate conflict, build resilience, and strengthen co-parenting relationships. With expertise in family dynamics, legal system navigation, and conflict resolution, she empowers parents to prioritize children's well-being and foster healthier family outcomes through practical, evidence-based strategies. Dr. Simmons, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I always love it when we have expert witnesses and just experts on the show because I think it really brings a lot to the conversation for the attorneys and also just kind of gives them, a little bit of additional information and resources to pull from. But I would love for you to just share, take a moment if you don't mind, just share a little bit more about you. How did you get started doing this? Like what kind of prompted you to go in this direction?
Well, it's funny, people ask me that, and I always say that I stumbled into it. I got a master's degree in like clinical counseling several years ago, and my first job out of school was with a juvenile drug court. And so I just thought, great, I can work with kids. I'm helping kids. This is a good cause. And my boss at the time had a degree in forensic psychology, and she
Mhm.
said to me, if you love this job, this is forensic psychology. So if you're considering going back to school, maybe look into that, not just like clinical counseling. And so I did, and I ended up finding a school where I could do a lot of different things. I could do the clinical work, but I could also do the court stuff and I could do research. So it was a win for me. And so I just sort of went from there and learned there are so many more things that you can do that I think we don't even talk about when you go through the training. So.
Mhm. Absolutely. Can you describe what resilience means in the context of family navigating conflict? Because I think of resilience and I think of, oh, you're building your business or you're
Mm.
doing something new or you're on a weight loss journey and you have to have that resilience to push through. And I think when people think the word resilience, they think in terms of that, but I have a feeling it probably means something different in your world.
Well, it does and it doesn't. And it's funny when you said that I thought about the word change too. People are like, change is good. And it's like change is hard. And it's the same thing with resilience, right? In order to go through something and be resilient, you have to go through something difficult. And so for me, when we're talking about families in transition, things that they're going through, that is resilience. They are resilient. They are doing things to get through these difficult situations that they're in. And so I think in that sense, it is the same. What's not the same is the context, right? And how they're having to build that. So I think primarily it's the same meeting, but ultimately you have to go through something difficult and come out on the other side. And that's kind of what makes you resilience. I think a lot of times too, we kind of minimize, you got to be resilient, but it's
Mhm.
hard. So.
Yeah. And this is a little bit off topic from that, but I feel like it kind of pinpoints what you just said and talks a little bit too about divorce and children. But recently, and I watched this last night, Oprah has a
Okay.
podcast now. And you may have
Mhm.
seen this where she interviewed Kristen, I can't think of her last name, but she was in that Coldplay
Okay.
video,
Okay.
the one that ducked. And it was
Oh
I
yeah.
clicked on it and I watched it because I thought, I'd love to see what's going on here. And it was a very enlightening conversation. And it was
Okay.
interesting because she was talking about how, people made a snap decision or a judgment about what happened. And she said, truth be told, we were both separated. She said her ex-husband was even at that concert with their daughter.
Okay.
And she was talking about like what she went through, just the aftermath of it. And actually her children were the ones that really
Mm.
suffered because they were, people were saying things to them. People would approach her in person with her children, which kind of surprised me. But I think and she kind of talked about that, how had she not had a good support system, that it would have been, she said, I don't think I'd be here right now. I don't think I could have handled it. And it was very interesting in regards to, again, both people going through a divorce and both people having children and how that affected them. Which brings me to kind of another question I have for you. What are the top challenges that you see in co-parenting today? Because I'm sure parents probably there's some things that they need to start addressing, like right out the door, like, hey, we're separating or we're going to be divorcing. What are the top challenges that you're finding?
Well, I was going to say something different first until you made your last statement. And then I was thinking one of the top challenges actually is that people come to me too late. I
Mm,
think a lot of times I'll get like court ordered um, recommendations, if you will, for
mhm,
people to do different things. But a lot of times, a lot of things have happened before they got to that point, and it makes it really hard to intervene. And so I wish that people would come sooner. I
mhm,
wish that people would refer sooner. So I had this one couple I remember, they were going to get a divorce. They had made the decision, they had a young child, and they came to me and they're like, what do we need to look for? And that was like, that's still like one of my favorite couples because I'm like, I love that you're thinking about this proactively. I
mhm,
think that sometimes, well, a lot of times it's hard, right? When you're going through something like that, it's
mhm,
hard to think that way. But it can prevent a lot of stuff, if you will, in the future. So I wish people would come earlier. One of the other big things, a lot of times people are talking about co-parenting and communicating, get better, and having resilience and these surface level things. I think that people don't mourn the actual end of the relationship. I see a lot of folks come in and let's say you get co-parenting counseling and they're talking about stuff in their marriage. And I have to remind people this is not about your marriage. That's a different type of counseling. This is about your kids. And sometimes it's really hard for people to make that differentiation. So I actually created this framework that actually is in the media. It's called Love Boundaries and Co-parenting. And the idea is if you look at what the point of a romantic relationship is, and let's say we're talking about like share decisions, right? Share decisions in a romantic relationship is cohesive, right? You're talking about how it's going to affect both of your lives. When it comes to your children, it's about them, it's not about you. So even though you're indirectly affected, the purpose is different. So that's something I can share as a resource too, if you're interested in having that for your attorneys, because that's one thing that is really really huge that people don't mourn that relationship and then they treat it as an extension
mhm.
of that relationship which didn't work. So we don't want to do that, right? Because it's not on a good foundation, it's on a shaky foundation. So
Absolutely. And so that, like, for example, a family law attorney who's watching that maybe they're working with a couple, you had mentioned that they wait, sometimes people wait too late to come and get help.
Mm.
At what point should a family law attorney say, okay, we need to bring in an expert like yourself? Is there like a
well,
timeline or?
yeah, for sure. Actually, I mentioned that couple who came in and they weren't in court or anything like that, but I
Mhm,
think that lots of folks, if they end up having to hire an attorney, it's because they can't come to an agreement on their own. And so in the beginning, when that attorney's hired, it might be a good referral because
mhm.
it's like, well, maybe mediation, maybe they tried mediation. I guess that depends on the situation, right? If that didn't work already and you have an attorney going to court to litigate for you, that's a good time to refer, not waiting till things sort of blow up. So.
And when you're working, within the legal system, whether it's with an attorney or a court case, how does your work influence the outcomes for the children and for the family as a whole?
Yeah, that depends. So let's say I can give a couple examples. Let's say that, someone's ordered, we were talking about co-parents, to do co-parenting therapy. It directly impacts the kids, right? Because the court is saying that you guys are having a difficult time making decisions. It's affecting, our cases. We can see it. Go
Mhm.
see someone who can help you come to those decisions. When kids consistently see that, you can't come to decisions, we teach them what we show them, right?
Mhm.
So, how do they learn how to do that? How do they learn how to resolve conflicts? They don't. It could be something as simple as that. When we're modeling things in front of them, we're teaching them about the kind of relationships that are normal, right? How do we teach them something different unless we do something different? And so that could be that for co-parenting. I think if they're ordered to do family therapy, let's say, and everybody comes in and they're like, you know what? We're committed to this for our family. We're transitioning into like two households or whatever the case is. And the kids see, okay, even though my parents aren't together anymore, they can still work together to,
Mhm.
help us have the family and the lives that we want. Then they learn that. But I guess the biggest piece of it is whatever we're showing them, that's what they're learning. That's what they're
Yeah.
internalizing. And
Mhm.
so of course, there's not one size fits all, but I would just encourage people to think about that too. Whatever you're showing your kids, that's what they're learning. That's where kids learn what is normal. Now, of course, you can be around other situations and learn different things too, but what we learn in the home, that kind of sticks. So,
Yeah, and that's very powerful. What's one misconception that people have about forensic psychology in family court settings? Because I think too sometimes when people think of forensics, they think
mm,
criminal.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it just for some reason it's associated with that. But what's one of the bigger misconceptions that you're finding?
You did name that. If it's
Oh, I
general,
did? Oh,
I tell people all the time, they're like,
I answered my own
good.
question.
You're good. Well, I have a second part answer to it too, but you
Good.
go to things, you
Uh,
meet people, and they're like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Okay, don't have a reaction." Right? Like, I'm
yeah.
a forensic psychologist. Like, oh, right. And I'm like, "Well, tell
Hmm.
me what you think that means." And a lot of times people do think like CSI, the stuff they see on TV
Yeah.
and criminals, and that is part of it, right? But
Mhm.
basically, I'm applying what I know about human behavior to the law. So I know about human behavior and functioning, and I know aspects of the law too, and I know how those things can impact each other. And so that's definitely a misconception. I think the other piece is, at least for me, is that you only need a forensic psychologist when you need to have a custody evaluation, or you need them to go to therapy, or you need some kind of service provider thing. One of the things I started doing more recently is offering well, I don't want to get too much into like my service details, but like offering services that help people see underlying dynamics. So instead of teaching people how to communicate better and to have better skills, it's like, okay, what's causing you to keep coming back to court
Mhm.
multiple years, right? Let's look
Yeah.
at that pattern, because if we can see what that is and break it, then we can actually have different outcomes. And so that's not necessarily going to be therapy, right? So the idea that you can only use a psychologist in the context of something like that. We have other things that we can do as well.
Yeah, and you had mentioned about child custody evaluations. And years ago, I worked as a legal assistant for a husband and wife team, and she did family law, and she did a
Okay.
lot of child custody evaluations. And I would because I was typing a lot of those up, but I remember, like she said, when she was first teaching me about it, she said, this is what happens. They bring me in. She interviews both parties. She
Hmm.
makes and she'll interview the kids if they're old enough. And she's like,
Hmm.
I make a recommendation to the judge based on what I find. And I remember asking her one time, like, have you ever regretted your decision? She goes,
Hmm.
there's been a couple of times that she didn't have any experts coming in, but like there were a couple of times where she's like, gosh, I hope I'm doing the right thing. And she said it actually gets confirmed later on that she did do the right thing, like she just kind
Hmm.
of followed her gut. So, and she did a lot of those. I don't think obviously that's the most desirable part because you're hearing so many different things and so many, you've got to, like you said, you're kind of going in there trying to play the mediator, playing the person to keep everybody that balance, and that's got to be really hard to do. What is one framework or tool that you think every parent should have in their toolkit for managing conflict, when they're going through this?
Well, I love you used a couple of words that kind of like perked up in my brain. One of them is every parent, right? And it's like there's not one size fits all. for every
Mhm.
parent. So I would say that recognizing that everyone's situation is different. And even though people might handle things a certain way and they think that you should do that, doesn't mean that you're going to or that you should, right? And then even the word should, right? When people are telling you you should do this, that's according to their preference, values, whatever it is. And so you get to dictate at the end of the day what works for your family
Mhm.
and that changes. So I think, in the psychology world, it's called cognitive flexibility, recognizing that it's not black and white, it's this or that, but it could be this, that, or any kind of gray in between because we're not all the same. We don't all deal with things the same. We don't all have the same situations, even though we might have similar scenarios. And so cognitive flexibility is the actual tool,
Mhm.
try not to trap yourself in black and white thinking. Try not to tell yourself you're a bad parent. Try not to tell yourself, you failed or your family's failing or anything like that. It's not true, right? It's
Mhm.
it's just what the situation is. And if you look at it from that standpoint, it's easier to do something with it. So, for instance, instead of saying, "Oh, my family fell apart. Now
Mhm.
I'm not going to have the family that I wanted." It's more like, okay, our family is separated. Our kids are in second grade, third grade, whatever. This is what they need. What do we do?
Mhm.
So I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah, and there's obviously I've seen people say this before where they're like they're not you can tell they're unhappy. It's an unhappy
Mm,
couple. They have children, and I even had a former friend, well, I shouldn't say former, but a friend from years ago I lost touch with that. I even said, "Why don't you get divorced? You're not happy. He's not happy." And
mm.
I'm like, and she's like, "Well, we've got to stay together for the children."
Oh,
And I'm sure you probably have heard that before.
I have.
And do you ever feel like what would be your message for the people who are like, yeah, I'm not going to go and get a divorce. We're just going to deal with it and just work, deal with it the best we can until the kids graduate, and then we'll deal with it. Because I mean, I don't think, again, I think their intentions are good, but they're not realizing what they're doing to their children. Like, what would be your message to those people?
Yeah, it's funny. Again, I'm gonna say two things that I sort of said earlier. One of them, it's a very personal decision, right? Everyone gets to make that for themselves. But the second piece, I did this with one of my clients before, and I said, okay, let's fast forward 5 years. If your children continue to observe what's happening in your household, where are they? How are they functioning? What are they doing? What does their life look like? Okay, now fast forward years ahead when they're choosing their partner and they have the same dynamic that they're observing with you and your partner. Is that the kind of relationship you want them to have? And people always have an answer for that.
Mhm.
And if it's not, why not?
Mhm.
And if it is, okay, right, maybe that's a non-issue. But if it's not, how are they going to learn to have the relationship that you think they deserve to have?
Mhm.
So, it's going back to that
Yeah.
teaching kids what you're showing them, right? And we can say as much as we want. I'm a parent too, right? It's like and they're really good at reminding you of what you said. You can say, I want you to do this, and they'll bring to your attention whether or not you're doing it, right? And
Mhm.
so they pay attention, and it's not always what we say, it's what we show.
Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, because the show is called Chromatic Counsel, I always love to ask all of my guests a question on color and wardrobe. So, when you're working with families, like especially in a high conflict or very stressful situation, do you find that you naturally gravitate towards like certain colors in your wardrobe that you feel kind of create more of a calming or reassuring environment? Or is it something that you just kind of you don't really pay attention to, or do you incorporate that?
I do actually. So if I'm going to be in court or something like that, especially if it's like new attorneys or new courthouse, whatever that is, I actually like to have something memorable. I tend to lean towards purple for a couple of reasons. Number one, it reminds me of my grandmother. That was her perfect, like, favorite color. And then also it's like a sign of royalty and richness, and I just love like that. Um, but sometimes if I'm going to be working with kids,
Mhm.
especially if they're in a more sensitive or vulnerable place. I might lean towards a lighter blue, right? Or
Mhm.
something bright and friendly. Because people, they do pay attention to that. Restaurants market off of how, things are designed and colors and all of that and how long people stay to eat. And so I think it definitely matters, maybe in not ways that we're thinking about on a conscious level, but um, definitely people are paying attention to it. So it depends on the situation.
Yeah. And I'll tell you,
Hmm.
purple's like my second favorite color too. I
Oh,
love
okay.
purple. Yeah. I like blue, obviously like the turquoise blue. But purple's like one of, I've got a lot of favorite colors, obviously, but thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you to just kind of in closing, based on your experience in forensic psychology and working with families in conflict, what's one piece of advice that you would give to attorneys that are listening to the show right now to kind of manage stress and maintain clarity while they're navigating emotionally charged cases? And I ask this because, as you know, law can be a stressful industry, and I think it's very difficult for people to not, it's hard to go from just observe and they wind up absorbing, what
Mhm.
their environment is. So do you have something that you would say to them, to, hey, like, you're dealing with a stressful client and here's some tips that I would tell you to keep yourself in check?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I would say about managing stress in general is doing it in increments. I think a lot of times people will say like, "Oh, I need a vacation," right? And honestly, once you take the vacation and you're done, you just get back to normal and then you deplete again. And so
Mhm.
I would say more incremental stress management techniques, whether that's like I live in San Diego. I'm saying we, I know we live in different regions, but
Yeah.
um, we live near the ocean. Maybe on your lunch break, walking to the ocean and just listening to it for 10 minutes, or just going outside, or just sitting and existing and having a cup of tea, or
Mhm.
whatever it is, just to break up the monotony and just giving your brain a break, right? Letting it reprieve, letting yourself just be and not do. So, incremental stress management, and it doesn't have to be anything huge, right? I think our field is very hypocritical. Self-care, you have to take care of yourself. And it's like, but what does that actually mean? It doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean going on a vacation. You can't do that every day. But
Yeah.
whatever it is that you decide to do in your incremental stress management, pick something that you can do every day that doesn't require a lot of effort, because it's more likely that you'll consistently keep that up.
Hmm. And I love that you shared that too. Like, even just taking a short walk, like you, and like you said, you're in California, I'm in Florida, but I'm by the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh,
So,
nice.
but yeah, you can do that, or you can take a walk. Like, I know some people. I have a friend who's an attorney who, she and she practices family law, and
Oh, okay.
like she was saying, like, we did a jewelry making when we were living in the same city. She's like, I'm going to take this class. It's jewelry making, and she was doing it for, like, again, stress relief. And it was so funny because she did it and really had a knack for it and loved it, and like I went there and I'm like, this is stressing me out, I can't do it. So, like, jewelry making for her. And then I've seen some people who are like, oh, they like yoga, like maybe doing some
Mhm.
deep breathing exercises, or even journaling, because I think you're right, everybody is different. You've got to do what works for you, because what works for one
Yeah.
person that could cause some stress could make you feel relaxed, and vice versa. So yeah.
Yes. I love that you highlighted that, because a lot of times too, I think people be like, use your coping skills. And it's like, you could do reading or writing. And it's like, coping skills don't work if they don't work,
Yeah.
right? Like, you have to figure out what that is. And so, yeah, it could be a class, but again, maybe some days you don't have time for a class. So making
Hmm.
sure you have those things that don't require as much effort also help just bring the stress down. I usually, I know I don't have a visual in front of me here, but I'll draw, like, just imagine a straight line.
Hmm.
And, like the heart rate monitors, they go up and down. Just imagine that straight line as your baseline. That's how you are when you feel good. When stress goes up, it goes below the line. When stress goes up more, it goes below the line. When you practice incremental stress management, it brings it back up to the baseline. So if you in the morning start your baseline and do something to manage stress before it gets really high, then all of a sudden you start higher than your baseline. So if something stressful happens, you just go back to your baseline. So that makes sense if you can visualize that. And I
Yeah.
usually like to let people think about it that way because then it's kind of like if you can get ahead of it, you can at most or worst or however you want to look at it, just be right below your baseline where it still feels manageable instead of dropping far beneath where it gets harder to get back to that point and maybe you end up at burnout or whatever.
Mhm.
So,
I've done hypnotherapy before, and again, not for everybody, but it really helped me. And the lady who did this for me, she actually gave me some meditations, and one of them
okay.
was like it was deep breathing. Like you could do it in like 4 minutes, and taking like 4 or 5 deep breaths. And it's like, what is one thing I can do right now to release worry? But you have to
Hmm.
do it after you calm your mind and you're doing the deep breathing so you can kind of think about, okay, what do I need to, you know, let go of right now, or what do I need to whatever, but again, it doesn't always, like, some people are like, I can't do that, and and other people can. So you just got to figure out what works for you. So I appreciate you sharing that. And I would love to, do you have anything coming up that you'd like to share with the listening audience? Any events that you're going to be speaking at, or anything at all that you'd like to share? We're going to have a link in the show notes so people can contact you directly, but I just always like to ask if you have anything coming up that you want to share.
Well, not necessarily anything that people can attend, but one of the things I'm doing is on the parent side, just helping people think about how to navigate divorce, kind of getting ahead of things before they get overwhelming, right?
Hmm.
And then on the attorney side, helping attorneys see those underlying dynamics that are driving the conflict instead of just focusing on the conflict and sending people to mediators. And
Hmm.
so that's something that I'm just offering to firms or organizations. And so that's something that I'm doing now, which is actually really exciting because I want people to have better outcomes. I don't want people to be in court for years
Yeah.
and not enjoying their lives. So
Yeah.
it's important to me as like a mission in my work. So
Awesome. And I know that the attorneys appreciate it. And I'm sure the court systems do too, because they're so backlogged. I think in every
yeah.
state and I think anytime they can take something off the docket, that's great. So, Dr. Simmons, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I've loved talking with you, and I would love it if you in the future would come back and share some more insight with us on another episode.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. That is a wrap for this episode of Chromatic Counsel. If you like what Dr. Simmons shared, I hope you will click the like button down below. Click on subscribe so you know when we drop our next episode. And I hope you can tune in next time. And as always, I am wishing you continued success.